A slightly different type of video today about something I've been doing more of recently, simply following YouTube's algorithm for music recommendations, seeing where it takes me and asking, does YouTube do a good job of recommending music I like? After all, it has access to loads of information about the music I already listen to. I use YouTube Music more than anything else these days, and I listen to plenty of music on YouTube directly, so you'd expect it to be pretty good. It should know me inside out by now. And I also figure we're all kind of at the mercy of Silicon Valley tech bros and their platforms anyway, so I may as well simply let them deliver that sweet, sweet content into my eyeballs and ear holes while ushering in the technocratic hellscape of the future. So, I've been recommended all sorts of random stuff via the algorithm.
All hail the algorithm.
From obscure late 60s psych blues to Peruvian folk, to a channel comprised almost entirely of just hour-plus long videos without any sound and just static images of colours. Okay, that channel is a little bit less impressive, but its mere existence is interesting. Today though, I'll be talking about just one album I've come across recently, an album called Entomongakum by an artist called Chypho. So, who is Chypho and what kind of music do they make? Well, they're an electronic artist based in Huntsville, Alabama, and that is all I know about them. Seriously, there's nothing else about them online as far as I can see. It could be one person, it could be a few, who knows? I kind of suspect it's just the one person though. I don't even know how to pronounce their name, to be honest. Chypho? Or Chypho? No idea. It kind of doesn't matter, and I'm just gonna stick to Chypho. So, the album itself then, Entomongakum. Look at this album cover. It's cool, isn't it? We'll get back to this later, but first, what does Entomongakum even mean? Well, it seems to just be the entomon prefix, meaning insects, added onto the Japanese suffix gaku, which according to Google Translate means written knowledge. So, is it just some sort of backwards constructed version of entomology, which is the study of insects? Japanese term for entomology is actually konchugaku, so Entomongakum is presumably just a weird little half English, half Japanese version of that? I guess it must be, and looking at the album cover and the track listing, both seem to support that idea. It clearly has prominent insect and nature themes, right? We have Dewdrop, Little Ann Ladybird, Plant Hoppers, Metamorph, Omamushi Crawl, and I believe Omamushi is Japanese for caterpillar, Dandelion Sailing, Skitter, Nectarine, we've got Army Ants, Compound Eye, Railroad Worm, the Night Choir, insects just everywhere. So, the music itself, what does the album sound like? What is it doing, and what do I think of it? Well, it is, as far as I can tell, and I could be completely wrong, an album put together from samples and originally composed elements, with more of the latter than the former. It is, in parts, quite ambient, sometimes more cutesy and what we might call popish, sometimes a bit more hyper and energetic in a slightly more obvious electronic music kind of way, but it's always instrumental. It sounds quite retro too, and not totally unlike what you might hear in a 90s computer game or a contemporary game going after that aesthetic. And it's always very evocative of, I don't know, what we might call happy, chill insect vibes. So I know the song names and the album cover itself both prime you to interpret the music that way anyway, but the music does do a good job of creating that atmosphere by itself too. It's actually something of an achievement, I think, to simultaneously lean so heavily into those insectoid aesthetics and to create a wholesome, cute atmosphere. To most people, those two things are complete antonyms. Like, people just do not consider insects cute, generally speaking. Bees, maybe. Bees are cute, especially bumblebees, but there are no bees on this album, and all the other insects out there, definitely not cute. So, this wholesome insect vibe throughout the album is achieved by combining some smart sound design with a pretty keen ear for pleasant, straightforward melodies. The melodies seem to tend towards the pentatonic, really, with bits of chromaticism here and there. But nothing wildly out there. On top of that, we have an ever-present vinyl static sound, which is arguably a bit affected. But hey, it works at adding a nice bit of retro warmth, and it's pretty common in this sort of genre. The album as a whole has a pretty broad timbral palette. There are acoustic instruments, squelchy synths, random bits of, I think, synthesized percussion, and everything in between. There's a very nice use of space as well throughout the album. Some tracks fill a lot of the stereo field, like Railroad Worm, and others are much sparser, like the opening track, Dewdrop. But whether sparse or busy, each track just sounds really pleasant, very nicely balanced, tuneful, well produced, and with that vinyl crackle and the occasional bit of ambient nature noise, each track occupies what ends up feeling like an actually very real space full of cute little bugs and creepy crawlies. Yes, they are cute and creepy, which is obviously a bit of a contradiction, but it is what it is. Like, take the album art. It certainly isn't anything I'd call obviously cute or nice. If anything, it looks like a half-realized drawing by a child copied from a nature book. That's not to say it's bad either, at least not as an album cover. I think it does a great job of setting up the retro, cutesy ambient atmosphere you get on the album, but it is a bit clunky looking. I actually think that more than anything, this album, and the album cover is part of this, which is why I keep mentioning it, is really just a very effective piece of world building. It's something of a concept album, even if it's not a full-blown narrative concept album. It's about building a picture of a particular world with each individual track working as part of a wider whole to portray a miniature universe of bugs and worms and stuff like that going about their everyday life. Feels like an imaginative take on, I don't know, an insect survey. It's like looking at a square meter of soil and grass with the eyes of a child. For example, ants aren't just little pests wandering around and stealing our food. Here, they're a military operation with their own soundtrack. Track 10, Army Ants, sounds like it could just be from a military-themed level in some long-forgotten Nintendo or PlayStation 1 game. Anyway, I said earlier that I think this album is made up of both sampled music and originally written and recorded parts, but honestly, I don't know. If I'm right, I certainly can't say which bits precisely are played and recorded live versus sampled versus composed digitally. I assume the acoustic instruments on Little and Ladybird, for example, are sampled from another recording. But you know what? I kind of like not knowing for sure, just as I kind of like not knowing anything about the artist, Chypho. It's cool and mysterious this way, and partly thanks to the entire retro vibe that permeates this entire album, from the warm VST sounds, the album art, the squelching basses, and what I have to assume are Japanese-inspired string sounds. This album ends up feeling like a genuine lost classic from the 70s or 80s, along the line of Mark Garson's Plantasia or something similar. It's almost like Chypho is actually genuinely one of those obscure and eccentric early synth pioneers, and this channel just happens to have found their albums and they're uploading them to YouTube for us. And again, it's all part of a certain type of world building in the wider sense. There's that little cute insect world I mentioned before, but there's also the world that we project, sometimes completely inaccurately. But accuracy isn't important here, it's all about feels. There's also that world that we project or invent for and about the artist that we're listening to. Sometimes that can be based on very concrete things. For example, if you listen to, say, a 1940s jazz record, you might know things about that historical context and you can make certain assumptions and work from certain stereotypes about that world that inform the picture you build around the music. And it's no different for Chypho's music, really. Sure, we lack any biographical information about the artist beyond lives in Alabama, but I think it's near enough impossible to not make these implicit assumptions about the person making the music and the way they make their music and what environment they make it in. Whether those assumptions are correct isn't always that important. It's one of those times where feels over reals is totally legitimate. One final note on Chypho's album covers generally. I thought at first maybe they're AI generated or something like that. They sort of could be, they have that sort of feeling, but on reverse image searching this album cover and the one for The Vege-Men's Revenge, another Chypho album on YouTube, they just seem to be very obscure pictures, presumably from old books, maybe, and probably just found on some random website. I couldn't find an exact match for Entomongakum, but Vege-Men's Revenge seems to use an image found on a few other web pages, and pictures very similar to Entomongaku's are easily found on reverse image search. Chypho really loves that retro, sometimes cutesy, sometimes a bit darker feeling. This one looks like the cover to a book about the sea. In fact, it looks a lot like books I remember having as a child. Chypho, whoever they are, definitely has a very firm idea of their aesthetic sensibility and a clear vision for what kind of music they're making. As we can see, this extends even to their album art, and I really appreciate that. Anyway, ultimately, in conclusion and to wrap it all up, I'd say that this album is very good and it works particularly well as background music. Now, I want to be clear what I mean when I say that. I don't mean it as an insult, as I know it's the kind of thing that could easily be taken that way and is quite often meant that way. You can definitely listen to Entomongakum very mindfully and enjoy it a lot that way. But I personally have enjoyed it the most while just leaving it on while doing other things, and it's great. Maybe listening to it while I'm writing stuff up, when I'm working the day job, anything really. And that's because it is, broadly speaking, a very ambient album. But it's not pure ambient. Some of Chypho's other albums definitely lean more into that pure ambient style thing, but this one is a little bit more on the fence. Like, if we were to compare Chypho's music generally to that of the king of ambient, Brian Eno, this album is a lot more before and after Science or Another Green World than, say, the more pure ambient stuff he's done, like Music for Airports. None of the tracks on Entomongakum are particularly long. There are always pretty concrete melodies and themes, plenty of structured percussion. So yeah, catchy, melodic, slightly ambient electronic music, and each track feels quite consciously part of a larger world-building project. Ultimately, it's not going to be the most mind-bendingly, groundbreakingly staggering music you've ever heard in your life, but well, what is, right? There's a modesty about it all, I think, and the lack of an obvious artist personality really feeds into that. It just feels quite pure, as if it's solely about the atmosphere and the experience, rather than just another product sold by a constructed persona. And the music itself is modest, not about showing off or impressing us with virtuosic playing, just well composed, well designed little experiences painting a wholesome picture of an insect world. So, if you were to ask me how I'd rate it, I'd probably say I'd give it 3 thoraxes, 1.5 chitinous abdomens, and half a Moog synthesizer. Nah, you know what, that's too stingy. This album gets the whole Moog. Give or take a couple ovipositors. Could go either way on that one. So yeah, I guess YouTube does do a good job of recommending me new music. As I said earlier, all hail the algorithm.
All hail the algorithm.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. This is a little bit different from my usual videos, so if you liked it, please say it, and I might just make some more like it. It's a little easier to put together than my standard videos, so I can just do it between other ones anyway. Thanks again. Bye-bye.